This is Aaron Edwards with Santos Springs. Welcome to this week's edition of the Friday Field Report, South America, January 23rd, 2026. Mixed bag on the weather. We're going to talk about harvest progress in Brazil, the condition of the crop for soybeans. Also, a headline is that they did start planting corn. We'll look at the numbers in just a minute. Corn has started. And then at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about a question that I get a lot. How can Brazil have record expansion, not record, how can they have strong expansion numbers on acreage at the same time that they have bankruptcies and at the same time be delivering soybeans to the market at such a low price? Make it make sense, right? So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the economics on farm of the decisions farmers in Brazil face that push them in that direction. But first, let me go ahead and share the screen and go a little bit over the numbers. We're still looking at this chart. Let me grab a marker here. Where are we? Grab a marker and let's go with red. There we go. So we're still looking at this. This is the soybeans. This is, these states account for 96% of Brazil's planted acreage. So it's not 100%, but it's a sampling of these states. And in a nutshell, if we look at it, if you've been watching, you know, we've gone over this a couple times. This gray area, this is flowering. So just over 17% of Brazil's soybean crop is flowering. The big one is this yellow, filling pods, that's 53.6%, or setting pods, that's that phase. Then we got the vegetative development, let's see if that cleans up, and that's this 18%. So a lot of the weather risk is in the crop. That is, these 2 points here, those account for a lot of the weather risk, which 17, that'd be 60, about 70% of Brazil's crop has potential changes to yield based on weather, 70%. So they're either flowering or, setting pod, filling pods, and there is weather risk, which brings us to the second point that I wanted to talk about. But before we do that, let's just look at this little blue sliver. This is harvested area. This tiny little blue sliver, that's harvested area. So 2.3% of soybeans are harvested. I didn't pull up an image, but double crop corn planting is under 2%. So basically these first soybeans, that's area to make room for double crop corn. It was between 1 and 2% planted on Safrinha corn. That's the double crop corn. So we'll start getting those numbers updated more and more on planting progress out of Brazil. But the big story potentially here is 70% of the soybean crop has some degree of weather risk. So let's look at the weather, right? Naturally, if there's weather risk, and there's a tale of really two regions. Northern Brazil, let's see a color that'll show up here. Maybe, we'll try with red, although it might be tough. Let's just get black here. Okay. This northern part of Brazil's production, so this is Mato Grosso, this is that northeast expansion area of Mato Piba. There, plenty of rain in those areas. There are some concerns. This is Paraná. That is the second or third largest soybean producing state, depending on the year. And this one competes for the silver and bronze medal, which is Rio Grande do Sul. This state here, which is cut in the middle, is Mato Grosso do Sul, and you can see part of it's okay, part of it's not, but it also accounts for about 10% to 12% of Brazil's soybean area. So there's a tale of two production regions. The northern parts, plenty of rain, but southern Brazil, and then I'm actually going to shift gears over here to this chart, and Argentina. Let me grab a marker here. Let's see, this part, yeah, there we go. So southern Brazil, we zoomed down, right? So this is that southern tip of Brazil, that's Rio Grande do Sul. This is Paraná. These two states combined account for about a quarter of Brazil, maybe not quite a quarter, but close to a quarter of Brazil's soybean production. Those two states combined, maybe even more than that. So 25 to 30% of Brazil's soybean production is those two states. This is a big production region in Brazil. Paraguay, this is the main production region in Paraguay. There is issues there. And then down here we have Argentina, which we have a northern region and a southern region in Argentina that produce. So that there is potentially a weather story out of South America. It's the southern part of South America. And generally speaking, the crop is pretty well developed. But if this persists, we could get a weather story. So it's a little late in the season to have a weather story, but it's not off the radar. We've had adequate moisture week after week after week. This is dry week number 1 towards the end of a production cycle. So it would be like turning dry in mid-August. Can you get a weather story? Yes, but you're a little bit hard pressed because is there enough moisture to close out the crop? Are you already out of the woods? It's just right there at that cutoff. So there is a weather story developing. Is it enough to be bullish? It's early and it might not even if it turns dry, has enough of the yield been locked in? Is there enough soil moisture? Time will tell. So we'll just keep tracking it week by week. There could be a weather story. So that was the production progress and weather. That was thing number 1. Corn planting has started. Prices in Brazil have dropped in Brazilian currency. So reais per 60 kilograms sack of soybeans. That's how it's priced. They have dropped about 40% since 13 months ago. So the tail end of old crop 2 crops ago was about 40% higher than the current price of soybeans. To put numbers to it, it would be like soybeans in December of 2024 were $14 and now they're $10. And they have dropped 20% since about November. Of this year. So we got that rally, we had a little bit of a push. They didn't quite feel it, but soybeans have dropped about 20% since then. So it was one big drop and then it recovered a little bit and then another big drop. And prices are very low down there. Many farmers, if not most, at these price levels are below their break even. Some of them are 10% below their break even. Some of them are 20% below their break even. It is a difficult situation for them financially, which begs the question, and this is a question that I get many times, why do they expand acreage if they're losing money? And they obviously are losing money because bankruptcies keep climbing. So what gives? And just to answer that question, you have to understand a little bit of the economics of the way it works down there to understand the motivation. So bankruptcies that have been going up quarter over quarter, setting new records since, I'm going to say we're probably 6 quarters in a row on that. Just every quarter there's more bankruptcies than the quarter before. Thing number 2, they're offering soybeans at a very cheap price. Why is that on the global market? It would be really nice if they weren't offering soybeans so cheap so we could get a little nudge here out of U.S. demand. And the third point is why would they expand acres with that situation? Pump the brakes, right? So let me just describe the situation so that you at least understand the thought process. For every acre of farmland in Brazil, there are 2 acres of degraded pasture. For the sake of a mental image, picture, Western Plains or the Texas Panhandle without irrigation or something like that. So degraded pasture that has, it was overused, overfed. I'm not saying that's the case in the plains, but just for a mental image. What happened in Brazil wasn't a lack of rainfall or less rainfall. It was just pasture that wasn't cared for quite in the ideal way decades and decades ago. So degraded pasture. And if you go put a few tons of lime on it, some fertilizer, minimum tillage, and plant soybeans to it for 2-3 crops, you can be raising yields similar to the I states here in the US on soybeans. So just again, for the sake of a mental image, picture if next door to you there was land that looked like it was straight out of the Texas Panhandle. You can go put some lime on it and plant it 2-3 years, and then all of a sudden it looks like you're in the heartland of Iowa. It would be very tempting to do that, especially since the land values increase depending on where you're at, 2, 3, 5 times more depending on the market, right? So just the incentive is huge to expand, not because of the year-over-year profitability of soybeans, but because of the land appreciation associated with that. So if you could do that, if you could put some lime on your neighbor on the farm next door, develop it, improve it, do some minimum tillage, and 3 years later you had an asset that was worth 2 times more, 3 times more, how much would you do of that if just to inflate your balance sheet? And then Brazil had cheap credit for a long time, so the more the merrier. You could get credit lines to do that. Well, you'd probably do about as much as your cash flow allowed you to do, because you can just plow that cash flow and balloon up your balance sheet, and then you get a bigger credit line. So why would you not? That's what's been driving expansion. Yes, the bullish years, the strong basis, since 2018, yeah, that all helped. But the economic incentive is a land appreciation incentive, and just the drive to farm more acres. That has been the economic engine combined with credit that has fueled expansion. That's where the expansion comes from. What's the problem with that model? Well, cash flow gets tight. Cash flow is very tight. Brazil farms compared to US farms have, on average, much lower cash flow than US farms. So if you don't have cash flow, that's a tough situation in bad years, because it's not like, oh my goodness, I had a little bit of reserve and I had some losses and now my reserves are smaller. It's, I had a little bit of reserve and I just got completely wiped out. And that's what's driving bankruptcies. So what's driving the cheap prices? Well, this expansion is more supply, but as they've poured CapEx into expanding acreage, they haven't put up on-farm storage and they haven't built up cash reserves. So if you don't have cash flow and you don't have on-farm storage, just to put some numbers to it, in the US, 60% of production stays on farm, and in Brazil, that's under 15%. And many farmers don't even have enough cash flow to hold their grain for very long. They're just hand to mouth, 1 to 2 months of cash flow, a lot of them. So what do if you don't have bins and you don't have cash flow? You have to sell. The grain market takes the grain from the most willing seller first, and it takes it at a cheap price. So when you understand the economics of what's been driving that, it makes a lot more sense as to how you could have those apparently contradictory incentives. But can that continue? Yeah, as long as people want to keep improving it, as long as there's that dangling carrot of land appreciation by just investing in it, then that's likely to continue. A couple of things that have really pumped the brakes: credit has gotten very tight. So a lot of farmers are having a hard time with credit, and expansion they're having a hard time. And we have seen expansion slow. And then who's going to buy this land, right? If some farmers didn't expand, build up cash reserves in the good years, and they're coming in and they're getting some sweetheart deals. But that's the economics behind that engine. And the same thought process for me, if just the way I think about the grain market takes the grain from the most willing seller first. The goal is not to be the farmer who needs to sell first. The goal is to not have to sell, right? So there's 2 ways to do that. Number one, you can be patient by having cash reserves and or storage. That's one way to do it. The other way is looking ahead and looking for opportunities in advance to say, hey, let me go ahead and take advantage of these prices. In November, when we had those strong prices, best price in 18 months on soybeans, how aggressive should I be so that I'm not worried about the market prying, these soybeans out of my hand at a worse opportunity. So when you combine those two factors, you can smooth out, you can always keep the leverage a little bit more in your favor on the grain sales, and that makes a huge difference to your bottom line when it comes to the end of the year. So there's a lot going on. We did finally get that 12 million metric tons of soybeans exported out of the U.S., which was part of the trade deal. Hopefully, we'll see that continue. But Brazil's offering cheap soybeans on the market, and that's going to be tough competition. Argentina's already sold a lot of soybeans to China, so there's a tough road ahead of the soybean market. But let's take it 1 week at a time. We can get a weather scare. We can get some friendly news. And there's always a headline in ag markets. That's what makes it fun. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Great weekend. Be safe.